So what is the solution to the mounting global waste problem? Well, let's bring in Scott Horne. Scott is the president and CEO of the Ryan Group of Consultants. The group caters solely to the issues of recycling and solid waste industries. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So, Scott, how are countries and regions dealing with this growing issue of waste?
Well, the problems are mainly in developing nations. Most of the developed nations have infrastructure in place for collection and disposal. That's not the case in many developing nations. And what we have been trying as an industry to do, the recycling industry, is try and teach people how to help themselves by minimizing waste and trash through recycling or source reduction.
Now, we know that China has now stopped accepting shipments of foreign trash, some of it coming from Europe, some of it coming from the US. So what is their plan now? How are they adapting?
Well, if I may, trash is a misnomer in relationship to what China has done. Recyclables have value. Trash is useless, no value, needs to be buried or burned or something. Recyclables become raw material feedstocks, their products. China has banned it because of a misunderstanding in industry standards. What's happened, though, as a result of the ban, is that many recyclers are being pursued by Southeast Asian countries, South Asia, and even Western Asia. Many countries that in the past could not compete with China because they were so big, they had such great demand and they were paying high prices.
Now, what are some effective ways that you're seeing as people try and modernize what happens with their waste and their trash? What are some of the innovations that are really standing out to you?
You know, the past 20 years have been just amazing for me. I've been in the industry for 40 years, but the technological advances, we're now using things like near-infrared technology. We're using robots to separate materials. Those technologies are slowly making their way into the developing world. But interestingly enough, we find that in many countries, the recycling industry is still very much a hand industry because they want to put people to work. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously.
So then, are you concerned then, since a lot of this, when it comes to recycling, is still handwork for the purposes of employment, are you worrying then that it's not going to advance fast enough because of that?
I think that's up to the country's governments. It's a policy decision. The recycling industry is one of the purest examples of basic supply and demand economics. Recyclables will move to the highest price, basically, and that's why it's a global trade. There are other innovations and policies that have been put into effect. Product manufacturers are reducing the size of their packages, minimizing any recyclables or waste they would generate. Design for recycling. The electronics industry, for example, has adopted that and been trying to make things more easily recyclable.
And for people who aren't familiar with the situation, what are the consequences if we don't adequately address what's happening with recycling and with waste disposal?
Well, I think if the world doesn't consider recycling appropriately, that we are going to have a global trash crisis probably by 2050. A lot of the problem is that landfill space is simply not available in some areas, and where it is available, it requires a lot of technology.
Well, certainly a lot to consider. Thank you so much. Scott Horne there of the Ryan Group of Consultants.